spooky place.
Welcome back to the spooky place, where the stories don't just scare you, they claim you. Tonight, we don't just tell a story, we unleash one. A tale that burrows into your mind, lingers in the silence, and watches from the shadows. It doesn't fade when the fire dies, it follows. And if you listen too closely, it finds you. The staircase in the woods. The forest was ancient, its canopy so thick that even at midday, the light filtered through in fractured beams, casting an eerie green glow over the moss-covered ground. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time, a place where the rules of the world seemed to bend and blur. The group of hikers, 4 friends in their late 20s, had been trekking for hours, following a trail that had long since faded into obscurity. They were lost, though none of them would admit it. The map they carried was outdated, and the GPS on their phones had stopped working miles back. But they pressed on, driven by a mix of stubbornness and the faint hope that they'd stumble upon something worth the effort. And then they saw it. The staircase stood in a small clearing, as if it had grown out of the forest floor itself. It was old, the wood weathered and gray, but it was perfectly intact. No rot, no splintering, no signs of decay. It rose about 10 feet into the air, a single flight of stairs that led to nothing but empty space. There was no structure attached to it, no explanation for its existence. It was just there. What the hell? Muttered Jake, the most skeptical of the group. He circled the staircase, his brow furrowed. This doesn't make any sense. Who would build something like this out here? Maybe it's some kind of art installation, suggested Mia, though her voice lacked conviction. She reached out to touch the railing, then pulled her hand back as if she'd been burned. It's cold, like really cold. Guys, this is creepy, said Sarah, hugging her arms to her chest. Let's just keep going. We don't need to mess with this. But Tom, the most adventurous of the group, was already climbing the stairs. Come on, don't tell me you're not curious, he said, grinning over his shoulder. What's the worst that could happen? The others watched in uneasy silence as Tom reached the top. For a moment, he just stood there, looking out over the forest. Then, without warning, he vanished. It was only for a split second, a blink and you'd miss it moment. But it was enough to send a jolt of panic through the group. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone, and then he was back, stumbling slightly as if he'd been pushed. Tom, Mia shouted, rushing forward. Are you okay? What just happened? Tom turned to face them, and that's when they noticed it. Something was off. His smile was too wide, stretching across his face in a way that looked almost painful. His eyes were bright, too bright, and his voice, when he spoke, had a strange, lilting quality to it. I'm fine, he said, his grin never wavering. Better than fine, actually. You guys should come up here. The view is incredible. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Tom, you're freaking me out, Sarah said, taking a step back. What happened up there? Nothing happened, Tom replied, his voice smooth and unnervingly calm. I just saw something. Something amazing. You have to see it for yourselves. Jake shook his head. No way. This is messed up. We're leaving. But Tom's smile only widened. You don't understand. You can't leave. Not until you see. Before anyone could react, Tom lunged forward, grabbing Mia by the arm and dragging her toward the stairs. She screamed, struggling against his grip, but he was impossibly strong. The others tried to intervene, but it was as if an invisible force was holding them back, pressing against their chests like a wall of solid air. Mia's screams echoed through the forest as Tom forced her up the stairs. At the top, she vanished just as he had, reappearing a moment later with the same too-wide smile and glassy eyes. "Your turn," she said, her voice a sing-song mockery of her usual tone. One by one, the others were dragged up the stairs, each returning changed in some subtle, horrifying way. Jake was the last to go, fighting with everything he had, but it was no use. When he reappeared, his face was a mask of terror, his mouth twisted into a grotesque imitation of a smile. "We're free," he said, his voice trembling. "We're finally free." The group stood together at the base of the staircase, their smiles identical, their eyes gleaming with a strange, otherworldly light. They turned as one and began to walk deeper into the forest, their movements unnaturally synchronized. Behind them, the staircase remained, waiting for the next curious soul to climb its steps. And in the shadows of the trees, something watched, its presence felt but never seen, a silent observer to the horrors that unfolded. The forest was ancient, and it had claimed for more victims, but it was always hungry, always waiting. And the staircase was just the beginning. The forest swallowed the hikers whole, their synchronized footsteps crunching softly against the forest floor as they moved deeper into the woods. Their wide, unnatural smiles never faltered, their eyes fixed ahead as if guided by some unseen force. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, and the trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers. Behind them, the staircase stood silent and still, its presence now radiating a malevolent energy. It was no longer just a structure, it was a gateway, a threshold to something far older and far more sinister than any of them could have imagined. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to blur in the forest. The hikers walked without rest, their bodies moving as if controlled by strings. They came upon a clearing, and there, in the center, stood a circle of stones, each one etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with a sickly green light. In the middle of the circle was a pit, its depths shrouded in darkness. Tom stepped forward, his head tilting an unnatural angle as he peered into the abyss. "It's time," he said, his voice echoing with a resonance that didn't belong to him. "She's waiting." "She?" Mia asked, her voice a hollow imitation of her own. Her smile stretched wider, her lips cracking at the corners, as if her face could no longer contain it. Tom didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, and the others followed suit, their movements perfectly mirrored. From the pit, a low, guttural sound emerged, growing louder and more distorted with each passing second. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the symbols on the stones glowed brighter, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like living things. Then she emerged. At first, it was just a hand, long, skeletal fingers clawing at the edge of the pit. Then came the arm, thin and pale, followed by a head of matted black hair that clung to a face that was both beautiful and horrifying. Her eyes were empty voids, her mouth a jagged gash that stretched from ear to ear. She pulled herself out of the pit with unnatural grace, her body unfolding like a spider's legs as she rose to her full height. The hikers dropped to their knees, their heads bowed in submission. The woman, if she could even be called that, tilted her head, studying them with a cold, calculating gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was a cacophony of whispers, each one overlapping and contradicting the others. "You've done well," she said, her words slithering into their minds like serpents. "But you are not enough. I need more." Tom looked up, his smile twitching. "We'll bring them," he said, his voice no longer his own. "We'll bring as many as you need." The woman's jagged mouth twisted into something resembling a smile. "Good. The forest hungers. The staircase calls. Bring them to me." The hikers returned to the world, their smiles hidden behind masks of normalcy. They went back to their lives, to their jobs, to their families, but they were no longer themselves. They were vessels, hollowed out and filled with something dark and ancient. And they had a purpose. One by one, they began to lure others to the forest. Friends, co-workers, strangers, it didn't matter. They used lies, charm, and manipulation. Their unnatural charisma, impossible to resist. And when their victims reached the staircase, they would climb it, vanishing for that split second before returning, changed. The forest grew darker, its shadows deeper, its silence more oppressive. The woman in the pit grew stronger with each new soul she claimed, her influence spreading like a disease. The staircase, once a solitary anomaly, began to multiply, appearing in forests all over the world. Each one was a doorway, a trap, a promise of something unimaginable. One night, a young woman named Emily followed her boyfriend, Jake, into the woods. He had been acting strange lately, distant, cold, his smiles too wide and his laughter too sharp. But he had begged her to come with him, to see something amazing, and against her better judgment, she agreed. When they reached the staircase, Emily froze. "Jake, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is wrong. I don't like this." Jake turned to her, his smile stretching impossibly wide. "Don't be scared," he said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. "Just climb. You'll see." Emily shook her head, backing away. "No, I'm not doing this. Let's go home." But Jake's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with inhuman strength. "You don't understand," he said, his eyes gleaming with that same otherworldly light. "You don't have a choice." He dragged her up the stairs, her screams echoing through the trees. At the top, she vanished, just as the others had. But when she reappeared, something was different. Her smile was there, but her eyes were filled with terror. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please help me." Jake's smile faltered for the first time. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice tinged with panic. "You're supposed to be like us." Emily's body began to convulse, her limbs twisting at unnatural angles. Her smile widened, but her eyes remained filled with fear, as if she were trapped inside her own body, screaming silently for release. And then, with a sickening crack, her head snapped to the side, and she went still. The woman in the pit appeared, her jagged mouth twisted in a snarl. She was weak, she hissed. "Useless. Dispose of her." Jake nodded, his smile returning as he dragged Emily's lifeless body to the edge of the pit and dropped it in. The darkness swallowed her whole, and the woman vanished back into the abyss. The staircase remains, its presence a silent invitation to the curious and the unsuspecting. The forest grows darker, its hunger insatiable, and the woman in the pit waits, her influence spreading, her power growing. But Emily's eyes, filled with terror, haunt the shadows. They are a reminder that not all who climb the staircase are lost. Some fight, some resist, and somewhere, deep in the darkness, a spark of defiance still burns. The question is, will it be enough? As the days turned into weeks, the forest became a place of whispered legends. Locals spoke of strange lights flickering between the trees, of voices calling out in the dead of night, and of people who ventured into the woods never to return. The staircase, once a hidden anomaly, began to appear in more places: abandoned parks, remote hiking trails, even the edges of small towns. Each one was a trap, a lure for the curious and the desperate, and each one fed the woman in the pit, her power growing with every soul she claimed. Among the missing was a journalist named Claire, who had been investigating the disappearances. She had heard the stories, read the reports, and even interviewed a few survivors, those who had climbed the staircase but somehow managed to escape. Their accounts were fragmented, their minds broken, but they all spoke of the same thing: the woman in the pit, her jagged smile, and the endless darkness that awaited those who fell into her grasp. Claire was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking her own life. One night, armed with a camera and a voice recorder, Claire followed a group of hikers into the woods. She kept her distance, watching as they approached the staircase. She saw the way their faces changed as they climbed, the way they vanished and reappeared, their smiles too wide, their eyes too bright. She recorded it all, her hands trembling as she whispered into her recorder, "This is real. It's all real, and it's worse than I imagined." But as she turned to leave, a cold hand clamped down on her shoulder. She spun around to see Tom, his grin stretching ear to ear. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a chilling monotone. "But now that you're here, you might as well join us." Claire fought with everything she had, but it was no use. Tom dragged her to the staircase, forcing her up the steps. At the top, the world seemed to dissolve around her, and for a moment, she was nowhere and everywhere all at once. When she reappeared, she felt something inside her shift, something dark and ancient clawing at the edges of her mind. But unlike the others, Claire resisted. She clung to her sense of self, to the memories of who she was, and fought against the thing trying to take control. The woman in the pit appeared, her void-like eyes narrowing as she studied Claire. "You're strong," she hissed, her voice a chorus of whispers. "But strength won't save you. The forest always wins." Claire's body convulsed as the battle raged within her. She could feel the darkness pressing in, threatening to consume her, but she refused to give in. With a final, desperate effort, she tore herself away from the staircase and ran, her legs carrying her through the forest as the woman's laughter echoed behind her. Claire emerged from the woods days later, her clothes torn and her body battered. She had no memory of how she escaped, only fragments of what she had seen. But she had her recordings, her photos, and her story. She published it, exposing the truth to the world. Yet, even as the article went viral, the disappearances continued. The staircase was no longer just a local legend. It was a global phenomenon, its reach expanding with every passing day. In the end, Claire's story became a warning, a beacon for those who might otherwise fall victim to the staircase's lure. But warnings only go so far. The forest is ancient, and its hunger is eternal. The woman in the pit waits, her jagged smile a promise of horrors yet to come. And the staircase remains, its steps a silent invitation to those who dare to climb. For some, curiosity is a fleeting thing, easily ignored. For others, it is a siren's call, impossible to resist. And for those who answer, there is no turning back. The forest always wins. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.